Bé, bona tarda. Moltíssimes gràcies per ser aquí. Vaig a l'anglès directament per la sessió d'aquesta tarda. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Pleasure to welcome again Ali Aslan at CIDOB. Ali was here a few years ago also to discuss German and European politics. That was 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So it was right in the middle of the refugee crisis and prior to the German elections of 2017. And we were discussing more or less the same topics that we will be discussing today, which is, of course, ahead of a general election in Germany, what impact for European politics, what impact for the future of the country and the European Union as a whole. So it's a pleasure to welcome him again here, have a full house for discussing this topic. And today the session will be chaired and moderated, introduced as well by Carme Colomina. You know her well, a senior researcher here at CIDOB. And she will be conducting first some dialogue with Ali on different topics, questions on this topic, and then we will also open the floor for discussion and comments and questions. So thank you very much. A pleasure to have you all here, and looking forward to listening to you. Carme, all yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, we know already Ali Aslan. He's an international journalist, a former policy and media advisor of the German government. He has been over 20 years presenter, moderator, and journalist for several media, including the CNN in Washington, ABC News in New York, and Deutsche Welle in Berlin. And now he's here back again in Barcelona to talk about these German elections. Germany is going to the polls the 23rd. In a very complex scenario with this turbulent return of Donald Trump to the White House, but also with the European Union and under the pressure to cope with all the changes that lie ahead. But also because Germany seems to be immersed in an existential crisis in a way. And of course, every leadership crisis in Germany is a European crisis. And we could say maybe that vice versa, that each existential crisis that the EU has gone all these recent years has had an impact in the German politics. So that's the reason we are meeting today, to know what's at stake in Germany and what's at stake in Europe in these elections. So maybe I will start with this existential question then, because I remember the other day that the former president of the European Commission, Jacques Delors, he used to say that the Germans believe more in the Bundestag than in the Bundesbank than in God. But I have this feeling that they have a very deep crisis of faith, the Germans lately, because of this self-perception of who they are, because this concern on social cohesion, which seems to be the main concerns for the German, and because the economic model seems to be also in the brink of a crisis. So where are the Germans now?
Where are the Germans now? First of all, thank you so much to Pol, to Carme, to CIDOB for having me. Indeed, I was here 2016, you remember correctly, a long time ago. It feels almost a decade ago, even though some of the structural problems we talked about then seem to have found their continuation. Fun fact, I was a language student here in Barcelona in 2002. Did not succeed, clearly, otherwise I would have held this talk in Spanish. But it is wonderful to be back here in this great city. Carme, you're absolutely right. To say that Germany is going through a rough period right now would probably be an understatement. Interestingly enough, if we would have held this talk here 10, 15 years ago, anybody here in the room would have had a hard time to argue against the German business model, even to argue against Germany's political model. I mean, by all objective criteria, Germany was an economic and political success. We're not talking 50 years ago, 100 years ago. We're really talking about 10, 15 years ago. It was a little bit even the envy of many countries. I mean, it may be hard to recollect now, but former Chancellor Merkel, she was being perceived as a true and remaining leader of the free world. The German business model was humming. Obviously, we had a big global trade surplus. And Germany had something which it didn't have for a long time, perhaps even the first time in its short history as far as post-45 is concerned. It had soft power, right? So Germany was being perceived increasingly as hip, as cool. Berlin, the capital, was increasingly becoming a very popular destination. And why do I say this? Because I think this success that Germany enjoyed for that time period that I'm speaking about made it complacent in many ways and made it fail to recognize that you cannot rest on your laurels, that you have to work every day hard and question your own model in order to succeed. What do I mean by that? Germany has went from Europe's economic powerhouse to becoming the slowest growing economy in the G7 with 2 back-to-back recessions. If you would have told that to anybody here in this room 10 years ago, they would not have believed it, that Germany would see a decline both in terms of economic, and we'll get to that later, in political standing in such a short amount of time. Make no mistake about it, we're not talking about, sometimes we may be misperceived. I'm not talking about a failing country here. Germany is still, at the end of the day, the 3rd largest economy in the world. But what I am saying is the writing is on the wall that Germany has to change its ways fast in order to succeed in the 21st century. What made Germany so successful? We had what I call, the golden triangle, or the successful triangle. What do I mean by that? Security was guaranteed by the Americans. Energy was provided cheaply by the Russians. And the Chinese were thirsty for German products. So with that combination, Germany obviously enjoyed a very long period of political and economic success. Now let's look at that golden triangle. We all know that energy from Russia is no longer an option for good reason, post-22, post-Ukraine war. China is no longer thirsty for German products. If anything, they have wisened up, they have caught up, and in many ways are the ones now that are supplying the world market with more sophisticated, or at least affordable, goods. And let's come to the third one, that security was always guaranteed by the United States / NATO post-45. Obviously, with the return of Donald Trump to the White House, that is a theory and, if you will, a model that will be heavily under scrutiny, if not even at risk. Where do I see the problems having arisen? I think if you had to do, I'm a journalist, Carme used to be a journalist, we are trained to think in headlines. And I think if you had to do a headline about Germany these days to sum up sort of the structurally deep-rooted structural problems, is that it is an analog country in a dialogue world. And I think the inability of Germany to successfully adapt to the digital 21st century lies at the heart of the economic problems and shortcomings that we're seeing right now. Just to give you a number, of the 100 most valuable companies in the world, how many think of those are German? Of the 100 most valuable companies in the world? Anyone want to guess? One. We have one company, that is SAP, obviously the software developer SAP. is the only country amongst the 100 most valuable companies in the world. If you had done the same poll 10, 20, 30 years ago, Germany would have been at least in double digits. But this is to show you that times are changing fast and they're not changing in Germany's favor. The car industry is not just an industry for Germany. It is the backbone of the German economy. And it is a symbol also of Germany's rise, economic rise and recovery post-45. Well, the German car industry, even though they've been told many times, unfortunately had a very short-sighted neglect of what we now know as EVs, of electric cars. I remember a talk show where the Volkswagen CEO sat in a talk show and sort of made dismissive, arrogant remarks towards Tesla, sort of like what is Tesla, you know, at the end of the day? Well, I have news for him. Tesla is now worth 4 times combined than the entire German car industry. Those are shocking numbers. And if you add to that, of course, that Germany obviously can also not keep up at the moment with low-cost Chinese EV cars, you know that Germany is at the moment playing no factor in an industry and in a sector that will heavily dominate the future. Do you see a rethinking? Yes, I see some rethinking on the part, but they're coming from behind. And the models that are being proposed right now, as far as German cars are concerned in the electric vehicle industry, are not competitive in terms of numbers. Let's look at another issue. So the car industry is really something I want to stress heavily because, again, it is not just any other industry in Germany. It is sort of the leading industry it has been, and it has been a source of pride for Germany for many, many decades, and for good reason, by the way. But unfortunately for them, times are changing, and you have to adjust to the changing times. Otherwise, you're going to fall left behind. Who here still remembers proudly showing off their new Nokia phone, right? Or their Kodak photo machine? Those are companies that no longer exist, or at least on paper. And this is the winner takes all, the very brutal model and world that we live in. You cannot rest on your laurels. You cannot be complacent. The other big hit, of course, that Germany, I move away a bit from the car industry, but I include them as well, was the war in Ukraine, of course. For many countries, for the Western world, it was a blow, this country, it goes without saying. But Germany's abrupt dependence, if you will, or reliance on cheap Russian energy and gas, combined with its exit of nuclear energy a few years back, prior to Ukraine, made German companies almost overnight less competitive, globally competitive. Because German companies, whether you're talking about ThyssenKrupp, about Bosch, about Siemens, about Ford, about Volkswagen, you can go down the list. They're all very much dependent on electricity, on energy, on access to cheap energy in order to keep the cost-profit ratio. And so what you have is these countries now are producing at a much more costly rate, which in turn, unfortunately, is leading to massive layoffs, which we haven't seen in many years in Germany. You see Volkswagen, Bosch, ThyssenKrupp announcing large figures of layoffs now in Germany. Ergo, the unemployment rate, obviously, in Germany is rising as well. And you have, and maybe I'll stop there because it's already, I just wanted to give you a quick idea of things to come. You have, of course, combined with the economic ailments, you have a crumbling infrastructure, which is being heavily, if you will, exteriorated by what we in Germany call the debt brake, which is basically a parliamentary motion that forbids Germany from accumulating more debt. On paper, by the way, is a good thing if you look at the high debt rate of many European countries or even globally. But of course, it is backfiring when you need to make investments, physical investments, human investments. This is where Germany right now is truly seeing a problem. You have real wages falling in Germany, and all this. And with that, Carmen, maybe I'll hand it over to you, because all what I just said, is a pretext for a lack of or increased dissatisfaction in the German public, amongst the German voters that are looking for political alternatives, right? And the political alternatives, maybe 15, 20 years ago, were not there. Now you see a much greater and increased political fragmentation of the German political party system. Most notably, obviously, it goes without saying, the Alternative für Deutschland, the AfD, which is the far-right populist, whatever you want to call it, party that is now the second largest as far as votes are concerned, as far as the percentage of votes in Germany are concerned. And with that, of course, ties in the big question of migration. But before I take over, because this was supposed to be more of a conversation, I hope the opening statements just give you a better idea and sense of why Germany right now is, Carme, in the identity crisis, if you will, that you have eloquently and correctly pointed out.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think you made a very broad picture already of these weaknesses, that they are not only affecting Germany, they are affecting, at the end of the day, the Eurozone and the European Union. And it has a lot to do also with this Angela Merkel's legacy, because it has been present all the time. This golden triangle, as you mentioned, it's called also the three big dependencies, and this inability to reform. And then when we talk about the alternatives, when there are snap elections, because of this lack of reform, because of this existential or internal crisis, the certainties that the model will change, they are not that clear anyway, even if we can talk about alternatives. So this is one thing. To what extent the Germans can deal with their recent past because of, for instance, Merkel legacy, but also the recent past of history. And you wanted to talk already about migration. And in a way, it's very much related, because these are the two big issues of this electoral campaign, migration and the economy. Yeah. But at the same time, even the economy has brought all these grievances and all this uncertainty. Is migration the one that really looks like the mobilizing factor in this campaign, especially because of this voting in the Bundestag, where there was this discussion about how consistent can still be the firewall that it had been making impossible to have a coalition or even to accept votes from Alternative for Deutschland. And this happened the same week where we have also an anti-immigrant party taking power in Belgium, the country where the cordon sanitaire was born. So at the end of the day, we are in a campaign that it can it be decided by the migration factor, even with this broad picture of the economy and the pressure that the economy brings to the system that you've made?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great question, because that is indeed, right? I mean, what is sort of a priority, right? Is the economy, migration, all these issues, which are at the end of the day decisive when you go to the polls. I could make it easy and answer with Bill Clinton, of course. I understand Hillary Clinton was here not too long ago at CIDOB. Bill Clinton famously said, "It's the economy, stupid." And by that, of course, he meant that is always the overriding issue at all elections, no matter which country, whether you're in Spain, whether you're in Belgium, in Germany, Nicaragua, it doesn't matter. The economy, your standard of living, whether you have enough pocket in your, have enough money in your pocket, whether you can afford rent, whether you can afford a decent standard of living, that will always determine the outcome of an election. And I would say Germany is no exception. Yes, the migration issue, Carme, you're absolutely reason. But here's an argument I would make why I think the economic issue really is the one. Because the AfD is not a new phenomenon. It was founded in 2013, right? Back then, interestingly enough, that was before the 2015 refugee crisis. And it was founded by a professor who actually wasn't an anti-immigration party, it was an anti-Euro party, you know, because there was a professor, Bernd Lucke, and he was so upset that sort of what he perceived to be Germany's share in having to save the euro after the euro crisis and the nearly bankruptcy of Greece and so on and so forth, that he founded this party and wanted to steer Germany away from not necessarily the European Union, but certainly the euro. It only recently, if you will, after 2015, sort of pivoted into an anti-immigrant party, ironically, after ousting the founder, Bernd Lucke, who actually wanted to sort of maintain a more mainstream economic emphasis on the party. But interestingly enough, the AfD, even though 2015 we had more than 1 million Syrian refugees coming into our country, and even after the Ukraine war in 2022, another million Ukrainians, I argue their votes started to increase when the economic outlook deteriorated. So I see a clear correlation between people's perceived or real decline in living standards and their frustrations and search for political alternatives. Yeah, I think if Germany was still in this economic heaven, you know, perpetrated and pushed by the Golden Triangle, the AfD might be a factor still, but I don't perceive them dominating the narrative as much as they do. And here's the point which I find interesting and troubling in many ways. You know, we're saying the AfD right now, you know, stands at 20%, 22%. For me, at the end of the day, to be quite honest, it's not that relevant whether they're coming at 20 or 25, because they have already succeeded. They have already succeeded in pivoting and dominating the political agenda, right? Right now, all political parties are talking about migration. Why? Because they want to steer away voters from the AfD. So right now, their model is already succeeding. They are talking about the one issue that matters the most to them, at least on paper, if they are genuine. And this, of course, goes hand in hand with the motion that we had in the parliament just recently, when Chancellor candidate Friedrich Merz, who's obviously the front runner at the moment for the Christian Democratic Union Party, the CDU, brought into and suggested and implemented a motion in parliament that basically was a bit of a revolution, make no mistake about it, by German standards anyway, because he said, you know, at the end of the day, we need to permanently reinstate border checks and turn away all asylum seekers, all illegal asylum seekers, right? Now, the first one, obviously, permanently reinstating border checks. I say this being here in Spain, being here in Barcelona. It goes without saying that would have severe European repercussions. That would technically be the death and end of Schengen as we know it. That's one thing. If Germany actually were to install permanent border controls one more. And the other thing is, of course, if you are, say, categorically all irregular arrivals will no longer be heard, will no longer be processed, then you're also deviating and moving away a bit from the humane aspect and the humanity front that Germany has successfully and admiringly, you know, I think, conveyed throughout all these years. But the overwhelming majority of the German public, if you can believe the polls, and polls, you know how it is, you always take them with a bit of a grain of salt. But even though the motion introduced by Friedrich Merz was essentially not passed in parliament, was voted down, 2/3 of the German public, 60%, are very much in favor of this being introduced. So yes, you have a very vibrant, very energetic, very emotionally led debate about migration in Germany right now. And if you're looking at the numbers, it is true that between 21 and 23, the number of asylum applications and illegal arrivals doubled in Germany. And if you combine that, of course, with almost daily headlines of attacks, of killings that are perpetrated by, on paper, by asylum seekers who should have been deported long time ago, then you have a very deadly potent mix, right? Because then, of course, the German rationale kicks in, and a lot of people are asking, why is this not being done? Why are these people that should be deported, that legally must be deported, that why are they not falling under, you know, sort of the umbrella that and I think what's so tragic about all this, Carme, is, and this is the irony and schizophrenia, Germany actually desperately needs migration. And I'll say, go a step further, it needs desperately needs qualified labor migration, right? It desperately needs so, because we are having severe demographic challenges in Germany. We are a rapidly aging society with fewer and fewer people in the next 10, 15 years working, and more people entering pension systems. So every scientist, every statistician, everybody will say Germany needs more migration, not less. But of course, here's the issue, because the debate is so poisoned that to even make that argument, because so many things are being lumped together, right? So you have qualified labor that Germany needs, but you have asylum seekers, you have illegal migrants, and these are, unfortunately, in the German political discourse, they're all lumped in together. No? They're all lumped in together. And then, of course, if they're all being lumped in together, you have no distinction. You know, you can no longer, in a mature and adult and goal-oriented manner, speak about what is benefiting Germany and what is not. What is true, that there is a public perception increase that migrants pose a threat to public security. And that is, unfortunately, something that is only benefiting, not just only benefiting the AfD, but is also hurting Germany as a diverse society. Look, you're having somebody by the name of Ali sitting here talking about his country, Germany. I mean, that in and of itself, you know, is an epitome. I was raised in Germany, obviously. I was a former policy and media advisor to various ministries. So Germany, by and large, is a diverse country. And I think, even though it had a tough time accepting it in the 80s, I think by now, you know, even the most hard-headed people, looking at the sheer numbers, that's, you know, would be hard. It would be very hard for them to make the argument that Germany is not an immigrant country, that Germany is not a diverse country. The numbers speak for themselves. In some German big cities, like Frankfurt, already in the new generation, 50% of the kids going to school have a migration background, right? So that is a trend that cannot be reversed anymore, right? So this is why, you know, the migration debate, Carme, is such a tricky one in Germany, because it lumps in newcomers almost in together with people who came to Germany in the 60s and 70s. And they all find themselves, you know, lumped in together in this very xenophobic rhetoric that the AfD is currently conveying. If you're asking me, just quickly to the polls before we bring in the other question. Right now, the AfD stands at 20%. My suspicion, I may be wrong, Paul, but my suspicion is they're going to come in higher. Why do I say this? Is because I think it's a bit like Donald Trump. A lot of people, when they were asked before the US election, whom are you going to vote for? A lot of Trump voters did not admit that they were going to vote for him. And then, of course, the big surprise, he won by a landslide, winning all the swing states and so on and so forth. I think it's a little bit the same with the AfD. I think they're polling at 20% right now, but I'm not sure if every single person being asked on the street at surveys, if they're voting for them, we're going to say yes or no. We will see. We will see about the outcome. Theoretically, right now, you can only have, mathematically, you can only have 3 options after the October 23rd election. You have the most likely one is the Grand Coalition, which is the CDU and the Social Democrats, which is being led, obviously, by Chancellor Scholz right now. And in that scenario, Chancellor Scholz has already said that he is not available, or he's not going to make himself available for a cabinet position. He's not going to be in a cabinet under a Chancellor Friedrich Merz. So then you have the CDU and the Greens. By the way, an option that mathematically is getting less and less each day. But let's say even it could work mathematically, it would be very tough for the Green Party to go back to their base and convince them to enter a coalition with a party whose leader just promoted closing of the borders and stop of the intake of asylum. I mean, that would be an assault on the very ID, if you will, identification of the Green Party. And then the third one, obviously, mathematically, would be the CDU with the AfD, something that Friedrich Merz has already ruled out. And something that I think he will have to abide by, because it would obviously be the end of his political career, because he already tied his political destiny to the pledge and the promise that he will, under no circumstances, enter a coalition with the AfD. Let's leave it at that, Carme, and then...
I have some sort of follow-up on the AfD. Because to my understanding, I can see that on the migration debate, it's not only about AfD rhetorics, it's the failure of the governments to deal with that, to build a narrative around the idea of refugees welcome or needed. Because I remember a few months ago, the CEOs of big German multinationals made a public statement asking people not to vote to political parties that would restrain the entry of arrivals or refugees or migrants in that case. So yeah, there is a failure on this, on how to deal with that. But at the same time, and from here, from Barcelona, it's also difficult to understand how AfD, with their rhetoric, that it's so outspoken sometimes with some slogans sounding, really repeating slogans that comes from the Nazi times, it's hard to see how, for the first time in September, for the first time since the World War II, this far-right party won regional elections in Thuringia. So this has a lot to do with how Germany deals with the past, or if young people in Germany, how do they deal with the past? And that was something already that we were discussing in Europe during the financial crisis, how Germany said that they had overcome this guilt with Europe, that they were not in debt anymore. Now again, this idea of guilt, and with the war in Gaza, the guilt is still very strong when we talk about Israel. So it's hard for me to understand how Germany deals with all these different consequences of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you touched obviously upon a very key point here when we're talking about Germany and the AfD, because make no mistake about it, I mean, far-right parties are no longer a new phenomenon in the European political landscape. I mean, if you're looking at the European map, many countries have already either resigned or adjusted to that system, whether you're Finland, whether you're Belgium, whether you're Hungary. Many of these countries, it's now become Austria now is the latest, if you will, to fall into it. So it's not a norm, but I cannot overstate, and that's why, Carme, I'm grateful for your question. I cannot overstate the point that a far-right party in Germany, a far-right party in, say, Austria, a far-right party in Finland or in Denmark is absolutely not the same than a far-right party in Germany. It's not the same because, obviously, history weighs extremely heavily on the German psyche, on the mentality. And yes, even though right-wing parties have gained success all over Europe, and you can argue obviously also beyond Europe, in Germany, the rise of the AfD is inevitably and immediately being linked to the question, is history repeating itself again? And that is a point that cannot be overstated in the German case. Because if anyone went through the German educational system, and I suspect some of you have, because I see your good friend Regina, for instance, in the back, you know that this is one of the first things you're being taught in German schools about what the Germans did between 33 and 45. And it is something that increasingly and repeatedly and frequently comes up during the political discourse, social discourse, as you pointed out, during the Gaza war. This is something that Germany cannot escape from, and by the way, should not escape from. But this is the question, whether it should, whether it is time not to escape from it, but sort of to put it in the archives, to say it provocatively, has become a source of debate in Germany. I mean, you have the leader of the AfD, Alice Weidel, and Alexander Gauland, who are openly saying, while they're not denying, obviously, and ignoring what happened, but they are suggesting that that should not prevent Germany from dealing with political realities in the 21st century. And if you are looking at, you mentioned, Carme, you mentioned the shortcoming, if not even failure, on the part of the political establishment. And yes, there is an argument to be made that the average person on the street finds it, if I'm also as a journalist looking around and then speaking to people, they find it hard to comprehend why Germany is, for instance, deporting fewer than 10% of the Dublin cases. Why is the German political establishment not protecting the German public? That is the sentiment, right? And with that, of course, and Carmen, then we are, because this is a very slippery slope, with these questions and these debates, trust is eroding in the ability of democratic institutions. And I'm not just talking about the German parliament, I'm also talking about the German media. The percentage of people who no longer believe what the German media says and does is very, very high. We're talking about the public broadcasters who are daily under assault for what the AfD sympathizing fraction is perceiving, and not just them, to be fair, it's perceiving as distorted and manipulative information. And, if you have trust eroding in the ability of parties to tackle the country's problems, you leave a vacuum, and that vacuum will be filled by somebody, because the public is looking for alternative political, but also looking for alternative political parties, but also for alternative media solutions, right? And then, of course, you are very quickly at X, formerly Twitter, right? And, you have the phrasing, you can, and by the way, I should point out, this erosion of trust was, I don't know how it was in this country, but it was heavily assaulted and under erosion during the pandemic as well, right? Where a lot of people perceive that they cannot voice their objections to the government measures against the pandemic without getting penalized, or if not even blacklisted, right? And let's be frank, in the year 2025, there is some merit to it. There's some truth to what happened. And so what I'm seeing is, to put it sort of back on the European perspective, you have a country that, you know, was very much perceived as an authority, a political, respected political authority, you know, with a pluralist society and a very robust democratic framework, Germany. And if you no longer have that, in times where we're already seeing an increasingly multipolar world, with the US doing its completely turning away its attention from Europe, with China rising, with India being emboldened, you know, with BRICS nations coming together and contesting and testing the Western dominance. Where is, I'm not saying Germany, where's Europe in this? Where's Europe in this debate? Where are we still leading? Name me one thing. Where are we still leading? We obviously stopped being, or probably we never were, being a hard power. You know, that was understood. Yes, France and the UK have nuclear weapons, but let's be honest, we were never a hard power. We were never the ones, you know, during the Cold War, we slid under the US umbrella, you know, and waited this one out. So what did we have as Europe? We were a soft power nation, right? You know, for all, no disrespect, but for all its economic prowess, you know, foreign students did not want to go to Beijing. They did not want to go to Delhi. They wanted to go to Berlin. They wanted to come to Barcelona, right? Why? Because soft power, because this is where, you know, an open society, where freedom, where freedom of thought, freedom of media, culture, you know, is still being held up very high. And we are in the process of losing that, because we are starting, each of the countries are starting to lose ground to these liberal democratic forces within our countries. Germany is, I know in Spain, you know, you have Vox, obviously, a party that is also in the running. You have France, where, yes, on paper, Macron is still the president, but is basically saving himself from one no-vote confidence to another, from one fragile government to another, with Marine Le Pen waiting in the wings, knowing her time will inevitably come. So what do you have if Le Pen is in charge of France? UK has already left the party a few years ago, you know, and then Germany, with maybe still a democratic leaning or minded government, but very much haunted by a far-right populist party that it feels the need to hijack or adopt their agenda. And I worry. I don't just worry about Germany, trust me. I worry about Europe. I worry about Europe in times where, you know, the Ukraine war is still ongoing. And you can make the argument, and by the way, German foreign policy, we haven't gotten to that yet. It's going to come to that. And perhaps I leave it to you, because I was going to get into the foreign policy aspect and the return of Donald Trump now. All that doesn't really bode well for what is to come.
Yeah, that was my final question before that we open to other questions in the audience, because I wanted to bring it to the European framework, and it's very much related to defense, to security, also because the EU, from my point of view, losing itself a little bit in this new situation, has put security as a center even of the foreign policy and the near future. And this has a lot to do with Germany, because at the end of the day, Germany is still the biggest country for that. France is really a powerful country from a military point of view, but it's true that Olaf Scholz's government, even being reluctant with helping Ukraine, has increased their defense budget in a 19%, and they have become the second largest military support to Ukraine after the US. So wherever it happens now, even if Friedrich Merz is more open to the hard policy and this kind of investments, we really can see the EU and Germany tiding their fate to what will the US do as a security provider in the EU, but especially in Ukraine. So how can these German elections change German position as a foreign and a military partner or actor, and the implications for Europe?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a very, very important question that you asked, because I've already talked about the economic ramifications, negative consequences that the war in Ukraine perpetrated by Russia had for Germany, but it goes way beyond economics. I mean, you remember the famous German speech by German Chancellor about Zeitenwende, you know, about the changing of times, basically, which was nothing by German standards short of a historic decision, because Zeitenwende, after the war in Ukraine began, basically implied and meant one thing. It meant Germany has to and will give up its traditionally pacifist role and invest heavily in military expenditure and so on and so forth. You know, the number was, the figure was given up to, Germany will invest up to 100 billion euros in order to sort of revamp the German military equipment and sort of become a player in that particular field. Of course, that comes after many, many years of Donald Trump criticizing Germany for not living up to its end of the bargain of paying the famous 2% of its GDP to NATO, and so on and so forth. But, you know, everyone who understands Germany, and I suspect it's many of you, cannot overstate. I mean, this pacifist mindset that was prevailing in Germany had very good reasons. I mean, obviously, you know, World War I and World War II were extremely two very painful, harsh lessons, if you will, and episodes in the German history. And Germany after World War II sort of went a complete 180, right? It became a pacifist society. It completely outsourced security to the US and to NATO. And in defense and fairness to Germany, that is also what other nations wanted, by the way, right? I mean, now it's being Donald Trump, notwithstanding, but you know, the world and the American happy and in fact insistent on Germany staying out of things. You know, you stay out of things military. You will write checks if and when we ask, but you stay out militarily. Well, times, of course, have now changed. Germany wants to ramp up its security, and Donald Trump's return to the White House is posing, aside from economics and tariffs being imposed, is of course posing yet another issue. He's already said 2% is not enough. Maybe European nations, including Germany, have to pay 5% of their GDP. And the question, Carme, of course, is always that of strategic autonomy of Europe, right? Can Europe still rely on the United States, can still rely on Washington to provide the security if and when needed, right? That is a question that has led the French, by the way, under Macron, you know, to insist for many, many years that the EU has to grow up, that the EU has to be able, security-wise, militarily-wise, to stand on its own feet and deviate, if you will, responsibility and protection from Washington. that is a mentality shift that is very hard to pull off in Germany because of the historic context that I just gave you. You know, if you tell a nation for 7 decades to stand on the sidelines and to sit out to the point where it completely neglects and malnourishes its military and even then abolishes the mandatory military service, it's very hard, if not even unfair, to then go to that same nation and say, switch it back on. Switch it back on. Times have changed. This is a generational issue, Carme. This is not going to come overnight. And you already see, if you're looking at the polls, Germany have a tough time. Germans have a tough time accepting that new reality. But you're right, of course. I mean, foreign policy-wise, it's very interesting that we talked about economy and we talked mostly about migration during the German election debate. One topic, Ukraine, has been almost completely missing. And there's a good reason for that. For one, to answer your question, I think the support on the part of Germany vis-a-vis Ukraine will not be diminished after the election because all front runners, whether it's Friedrich Merz, whether it's Olaf Scholz, interestingly enough, even the pacifist Greens are for abandoning financial and military support to Ukraine. None of them are. The two political parties that are the AfD and the BSW, Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, a very flamboyant woman whom we haven't talked about here today yet, who used to be part of the left and sort of, you know, had a falling out with the left party, founded her own movement, and could possibly cross the 5% threshold. This is a woman, this is not my saying. Her interview, she's saying it. She has sympathies for Moscow. She has sympathies for Russia. I'm not saying sympathies for Putin, but certainly for Moscow and for Russia. And yes, her proposal is that in times like these, when the German standard of living is declining, when Germany is starting to struggle economically, we can no longer afford to pay billions and billions for Ukraine. And with the constellation that I perceive to come out of the election post February 23rd, my suspicion is, Carme, in the short term, there's not going to be any immediate change as far as German aid is concerned. Interestingly, the Greens are much more gung-ho than the Social Democrats, even criticizing Olaf Scholz for withholding funds for the time being that are supposed to be going to Ukraine. And we have, as I pointed out, we have 1 million Ukrainian refugees, whatever you want to call them, people who have fled, obviously, from war. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting because I think a lot of people in Germany, in Europe, and to be fair, globally, are speculating that Donald Trump will, one way or the other, end this war. Now, I don't know what magic rabbit he will pull out of his magic hat. He has famously pledged to stop this war on day one of his presidency. According to my calendar, it's already past day one. But, and from my understanding is he hasn't spoken to Putin yet. That is at least what I'm hearing. But I think the speculation, Carme, vis-a-vis Ukraine, which has dominated, and for good reason, you can argue the headlines in Germany, and I suspect in this part of the world as well for the past 3 years, is an issue that interestingly has taken a back seat in this election campaign.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that now we're going to open the floor to the questions in the audience. We can take a first round if you want to, and then there was the first hand here, i després el Xavier i després la Mar. There is a microphone that we can share. Yeah, thank you.
In the first picture that you draw of the situation 45 to nowadays, I was missing out one point. As the AfD rose in the first place in the eastern part of Germany, I think the reason was quite not too well done reunification. You didn't refer to this. I think most of the voters in the first times came from the east, and as you refer to education, there's a big difference. I'm at the age in my education, which I did in Germany, I didn't hear a word about the Nazis and Hitler. All I learned about this, I learned afterwards on my own.
You grew up in Eastern Germany, I suspect?
My education, yes.
Yeah.
And the same happened to the people, to the older generation at least, in the eastern part of Germany. They had a totally different education, not the dialectical we did in the West. I grew in the western part. And I think this is a very big, because we always have to look to the roots where the right-wing people come from. The leaders came, as I understood, they came from the western parts, but the ground they found was fertile in the eastern part. I would like to hear something about this.
Thank you, absolutely.
Hello, Ali. Thank you very much for your comments. I would like to know what's your opinion on Angela Merkel. Didn't she saw it coming? The system was already failing. In Munchau's latest book, Kaput, he mentions also a triangle: finances, politics, and industry, helping each other to keep it afloat, the system that was already failing, and the fixation with the deficit. Why is that? Because she's such a clever woman, and you said leader of the free world. Perceive us, no? But then the German that she left behind is not the German everybody expected.
Thank you so much.
Gracias. Thank you. No, I was thinking that things are bad but can get worse, no? And after listening to you, we just saw how things have come to this situation. But I have the feeling that after the election, the worst result, it's not that AfD can be fair of, it's that at the end, they will need to conform with reality, and they will have to stop blaming immigrants because of the problem that Germany have. So that means that they will need to boost the reforms that German economy needs. So if AfD is the main opposition party, that will be for sure, then the Gross Coalition or whoever it is will deal with the damage of these reforms and so on. So that will make AfD stronger from the situation. So what I envisage is in 3-4 years, having AfD in a more stronger situation than they are really now. It's why I'm envisaged, but I wanted to hear what are your thoughts about this, because they can still be blaming immigrants for a few months, but at the end, they will need the immigrants, they will need to boost the reforms, and this has a social cost or impopularity at some point. So that this impopularity will mean the rise or a stronger AfD.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Let's take, yeah, of course. Yes, of course. Sure.
Yes, thank you. I think I fully agree with your statement. Nevertheless, I was surprised that you mentioned 3 scenarios as a result of the elections. And surprised in the sense that the second one you mentioned, CDU and the Greens, mathematically. but you did not mention a grand coalition with Greens. This is also a very, very feasible solution, let's say.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me start with the last one because it's the easiest to answer. If I gave you a piece of bread, right, and you could share it with 2 or 3 people, how many people would you share it with? I mean, you're probably a very humane person and, you know, very charitable person. But so the point I'm making, of course, is if the numbers for the Grand Coalition are sufficient, why would you bring a third one on board? Because then you have to get a decision approved not by 2 leaders, but by 3 leaders. Do you know what I'm saying? It would get too messy. And you already saw it during the failed coalition. This is the reason why we're having the snap election. It's the reason why I'm sitting in Barcelona today talking about election. The election was not supposed to happen for another 6 to 8 months in Germany, right? The reason why we have it is because the 3-way coalition, namely, of course, SPD, Greens, and the Liberals, the FDP, did not get along in the end of the day. And the FDP leader, Christian Lindner, whom we haven't spoken about it yet, you know, sort of threw in the towel and said, I'm no longer part of this, over the debt break, by the way. And this is why it ties in with your question about the German fetish with not having a deficit and making debt. But no, the short answer is, look, any party, you know, that mathematically can form a coalition and a government with one party is not going to bring a third one on board. I mean, it's just because you bring in a completely different party ideology, opinions, egos on board that is going to make your way of governing more difficult. Yes, yes. I mean, I see. If you mean if the Grand Coalition is not sufficient, you mean. You're right. I mean, surely, no. I get. Your point is well taken. Well, the CSU, sort of the, you know, smaller, you know, sister of the CDU, if you will, in Bavaria. Look, they may have said we don't want to enter a coalition with the Greens, but I think we have all witnessed, you know, political election campaigns, and then people who yelled at each other and called each other bad things enter a coalition, you know, if and when the opportunity was there. So I wouldn't give too much credence and put too much weight, honestly, on what is being said right now about, I'm not going to, you know, get in boat with them and so on and so forth. So, but you're right, of course. Your point is well taken. If the votes are not sufficient, if the votes for the Grand Coalition for Friedrich Merz and the SPD are not sufficient, they will have to look for a third partner. You're absolutely right. I mean, one way or the other, this is what I predict. It's going to get messy, right? It's going to get very messy on the evening of October 23rd. And I will go a step further, not to, you know, delve into too much negativity here. I think if whatever comes out of October 23rd, and I think on October, why do I keep saying up to October 23rd? I don't accept that there are snap elections. I go back to the original in February 23rd. Is no matter what comes out of it, yes, I think for this time, for this final time, this is my personal opinion, by the way, it's not rooted in any science, this is a very subjective, for this one final time, they will be able to keep the AfD out. I think for this time, because so much credibility has been, you know, wavered and staked on the issue of keeping them out. But I think the next time, depending on how long the new government will last, whether it's for 1 year, 2 years, or if it's for the full 4 years, this may be the last election in Germany we see where mathematically, but also sociologically, Germany will be able to keep the AfD out completely from ruling and from governing. Your question about the East-West divide is very much correct. of course, is very much appreciated. And it is true that the AFD has its strongest following and biggest election successes in the eastern part. That is absolutely true. But I wouldn't make the mistake of underestimating their increased appeal across the nation. Yes, they may not be able to really take a strong foothold, say in Hamburg, in Berlin, in the big cities. But I think they are appealing to an anger about a botched and failed migration policy that goes beyond eastern states. So what you're saying is absolutely correct, but I think one cannot ignore that the frustration is a nationwide frustration. The attacks that we've regrettably seen, whether it's Aschaffenburg, whether it's Solingen, are not just happening on Eastern German soil. So yes, you're absolutely true, and thank you for pointing out. You have to take into account a very strong East-West divide when it comes to the appeal of the AfD. But I think to count sort of on that promise or hope that Western nations will help in curtailing their rise on a nation, on a national level, that might not come to fruition. But the East-West divide that you've pointed out is, of course, a very valid one. Yes, and that is, of course, a subject matter for an entirely different talk, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the debate, interestingly, 35 years after reunification, still exists, indeed. I think if you had asked people, back in 89, 90, Germany 35 years from now, will East-West divide still play an issue? I think back then, because 35 years seems, emotionally such a long time, you would have said, oh no, it's going to be a new generation and, this and so forth. But no, you're right. You're right. It is still very prevalent in Germany. What is my opinion of Angela Merkel? Look, she's an interesting phenomenon, isn't she? I mean, this is a woman who basically out of nowhere, let's put it this way, basically out of nowhere came to power and led the most powerful European nation and largest European economy for 16 years, right? I mean, a scientist from Eastern Germany, famously, who her biography, she says it herself, she started dabbling and experimenting with other parties first. She went to the Social Democrats, didn't I guess, get the feedback that she was hoping for, landed with the CDU, and then was sort of promoted as, a woman from Eastern Germany. I think she led the Ministry of Family and then Ministry of Environment, and so on and so forth. And then famously revolted against former Chancellor Helmut Kohl during a donation campaign scandal, and put herself as the front runner of the CDU. I think even if you had asked Angela Merkel herself in the year 2005, when she was elected by an extremely narrow margin, that she's going to be ruling Germany for 16 years, and perceived, that's why I use the word, and having the West, particularly during the first Trump presidency, having her perceived as the true leader of the free world. I think even she could not have believed that. She famously wrote her biography. She just published it, called Freiheit, Freedom. But I think look, the point I will make about Angela Merkel is the following. I think Angela Merkel, even though she grew up in Eastern Germany, she understood, and this is, Paul, you know, a characteristic of a very successful politician. She understood the psyche of the German nation, I think, better than most Western German politicians. What do I mean by that? The Germans are, again, we go back to history and post-45, as always. Germans are some of the most risk and change-averse people you will find in this universe. Okay? And again, Carme, that has historic reasons. Because whenever, historically, there was sudden and abrupt change in Germany, and whenever you had charismatic leaders in Germany, it didn't work out so well. So post-45, Germany went 180 degrees. It says, we are going to have the most uncharismatic and boring politicians in the world. We are going to have a, if it ain't broken, don't fix it approach. We are going to put stability above experiments. And we are going to place emphasis on monotony and stability and predictability. And this is not an insult, or this is not an accusation. I think if you'd ask Germans on the street, even her fans, to describe Angela Merkel, those attributes that I just pointed out would come up. Predictable, stable, unemotional, risk-averse, change-averse, right? All these things. And that was her success formula. It was her success formula. I remember an election campaign when, by the way, all election posters are lame, no matter which country you go to. And they have these cheesy slogans like, you know, you can trust me and blah, blah, blah. I remember an election campaign where her election poster was her face and the slogan, you know me. And if you know nothing about the German psyche, that poster tells you everything. She won that election, by the way. I'm sorry? We'll get to that. Yeah. So up until 2015, from 2005 to 2015, you had a German chancellor who didn't rock the boat, even during the Euro crisis, where actually many prominent German politicians, including then former finance minister Wolfgang Schäuble, actually pleaded for Grexit, you know, for Grexit to leave the Eurozone and so on and so forth. You know, it was Chancellor Merkel, to her credit, who brought people together. You know, her most famous and most, I guess, favorite word that comes up in her biography is compromise, right? The art, for her, you know, the definition, the former General Clausewitz definition of politics is Merkel's definition. What is it? Politics is the art of the possible, right? So no grand visions, no grand movements. It's like, what is possible given the scenario that we have? And in that sense, by the way, she was, let's put it honestly, in this world of these flamboyant and ego-driven, mostly male politicians, yes, she stood out positively. You know, if you had presidents and prime ministers going up and, you know, basically blowing their own horn and saying what a great president and prime ministers they are, her humility, and I respect her for that. I shared the stage with her a couple of times. I've seen her in supermarkets in Berlin. That was not an act, okay? So you would have never seen another European or global leader leading such a powerful nation for 16 years and then standing in line at the supermarket, maybe in Scandinavia still. Yeah? But it's true, that was her, that was not an act. What happened in 2015, namely the fact that, by the way, a lot of people say that she opened the borders, which is technically absolutely not correct. She didn't close the borders. I think, in the end, the result is the same, but I think technically it matters. In 2015, she took a very atypical position, which we in Germany were surprised about, to be quite honest. Her decision not to close the borders for 1 million Syrian refugees without consulting her European partners first, without sort of going to Brussels, bringing everyone together and looking for a European solution, that was a surprise. And I think irreversibly, her success and her legacy will also be first and foremost tied to that decision. And by the way, I'm not sitting here today and passing judgment on that decision, right? Because the decision will differ whomever you're going to ask. A lot of people saw 2015 as a shining moment for Germany, for post-World War II Germany, right? A nation that has caused so much destruction in the world, now caring for those fleeing from war atrocities, right? That is a point that cannot be understated. But the other side of the coin, of course, one that is being pushed and perpetrated by the AfD, is that she disrupted and disturbed the social equilibrium and harmony in Germany and created a political vacuum by moving some say to the center, but some would even say perhaps in some instances left to the center, that it gave way to the rise of the AfD. The question, and I've noted I took a long time to respond, but I think the long response is warranted, given that we're talking A, about the longest running chancellor in the history, and B, about the nation who presided, despite her many great contributions, presided over a time that is now leading to many of the shortcomings that I talked about in my opening statement, right? Yes, it is true. It is true. Digitalization was neglected during her time, and we're paying the price for it right now. And maybe the economic model that Germany thrived on for so many years, the dependencies, could have been reviewed, Car industry lobbying Brussels, cheap Russian gas, you name it, we can go down the list. So it's very, it's not a black and white answer, as you can tell, because this is not she's neither the devil, as the AfD is making her out to be, nor is she Mother Teresa, as her supporters would say that she was the best thing happening to Germany. The answer, as always in political realities, lies in the middle. I don't know how history will judge her. In the short term, with the war in Ukraine, with the shortcomings of the economic situation of the German economy, a lot of people now taking a second look at her legacy. And her book, I think the timing of her book is not a coincidence, right? Because this is a woman, for Chancellor Merkel, who shies away from the public spotlight and basically disappeared after, she moved away and stepped away from office, for her to write a biography and then publicly speak about it is very atypical. But this is a woman who's out in the open again, maybe even against her own initial instinct, to set her own historic record straight. And Friedrich Merz, last point on that, And the ghost of Merkel is haunting Friedrich Merz, because the two of them famously dislike each other. Famously dislike each other, so much so that Friedrich Merz, of course, talks about sort of rescuing the CDU from the grip of the Merkel fraction. And what he means by that is, of course, bringing it back to what the CDU was, a center-right party. Right? And so the fractions within the CDU, the Merkel loyalists versus people who are much more in line with Merz, that is a battle that cannot be overstated. When she was asked Carme, during a public appearance last week, whether she would prefer Merz or Robert Habeck, our Minister of Economy, it took her a long time to answer. And it took, and then even then it was not a direct answer.
Merkel's way. Time for a very short question and a very short answer. If there is still other questions, okay, then we will finish on time.
Otherwise, I'll just maybe use the last 60 seconds.
Sure, please. Tu agafes pel després.
No, you will finish. I'll just have a 60 seconds roundup. Yes.
Thank you. It was very interesting. I'm a retired journalist, but I was in Germany actually the day that the AfD made its public presentation. As you remember, I think it was in 2013, and they were simply Eurosceptical. You mentioned that they described themselves as Eurosceptical, they were against the euro, but they were not actually considered a far-right party. Could you maybe evolve a little bit more how they evolved to that?
That is very yes, very short.
Thank you.
Very short
I was
answer.
going to say it had to be short, but
It will be very short. Yeah. No, basically, look, after 2015, there were some fractions within the AfD who saw an opportunity for their party to sort of sharpen their brands, right? And so there was an internal struggle, even so much so, as I pointed out, that the founder of the party was swept away and expelled. And it's the new fraction that took over, including people like Bernd Lucke and so on and so forth, who, sort of took the party to then this new direction that it is in now, sort of trying to capitalize, profiting from a new political reality and a political vacuum. And there was a question, by the way, I'm sorry, half a question to the lady with the glasses, because you pointed out, of course, yes, you're right. It's very easy for the AfD as an opposition party to demand things right now and to just sit back and make the established parties look stupid. It's going to be a very different ball game when you actually have to rule the country and be faced with certain political realities, namely that Germany desperately, in order to make up for its demographic challenges in the future, desperately needs qualified labor. And by the way, Carme has a very tough time in this global competition for the best and brightest minds out there. Spain is in it, Germany is in it, all the countries in the world want the best and brightest. The US, of course, as always, is the best in it, in attracting that. Germany is not doing a good job because a lot of these, say, scientists, computer scientists, whatever, if they have the option, frankly, to go to Canada, to go to the US, to go to London, if you will, and then to come to Berlin, even if it's for the language barrier, I can tell you, and the high tax rate, they're not coming to Germany. That one I can assure you. But let me just say 30 seconds before we wrap up, because I fully understand, and thank you, by the way, for your attention. I fully understand that sometimes, the impression was conveyed that, Germany is in a free fall. Like we're looking at a failing nation. And I can tell you there are, probably 150, 160, 170 nations who would love to trade Germany's problems right now with theirs, right? So let's put things in perspective. What I talked to you about today was the third largest economy in the world. And it's still the largest economy in Europe and the most populous and largest nation in Europe. It is still a relevant country. Germany matters. But what my talk was today was, if you will, a passionate plea for Germany to wake up from its complacency. And yes, also from its aloofness, because success has gotten to their heads a bit as well. So this talk today was not to say that Germany's decline is irreversible, that Germany is going to be a Mali and Somalia within the next 30 years. No disrespect. Of course not. But what I'm saying is, the party that we enjoyed in Germany for now, and by party, I don't mean political party, I mean jubilation, that one is over, right? And for Germany to not only become a robust and affluent and prosperous nation economically, but also psychologically, and also an asset to Europe, because this is why I'm here today. It needs to wake up, and it needs to wake up quickly. And that cannot be the responsibility of a political party or of the next chancellor or of the CEO of Volkswagen. No, it needs to be a concentrated effort. Everybody needs to wake up from this lethargic mood that we have right now, because when the German football nation is starting to get eliminated in the World Cup in preliminary rounds, things are changing. The trickle-down effect is now reaching, elements. This was, of course, jokingly meant, but it is really true. The decline is not irreversible, but the decline is real. And the faster the political, the economic, and the scientific, civil organizations, academia, the quicker everybody gets around that, the better for Germany, and most importantly, the better for Europe.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Ali, for sharing your thoughts, your knowledge, all these trends that we'll keep in mind when trying to understand what will happen the 23rd of February in Germany.
February, not October.
February. I gràcies a tothom per venir, per una vegada més per venir al CIDOB, i us esperem ben aviat en un altre esdeveniment. Gràcies, adéu-siau.